So greetings to all Dharma friends. Chutruk Samala Tashideli Shugiya. So today I'm going to be presenting the third video in the series about attention deficit disorder and Buddhist practice. And the topic of today's video is daily practice with ADD. Jirtang di video di liu sumpare dua, donang jempe nepa thang, nangchogi nyamlen korla. Di video sumpare dua. ane deringi juja migse di nima rere ninregi kandun dang dunang jempe nepa. So I actually realized that perhaps this should have been the second rather than the third video in the series, simply because most of us as Buddhist practitioners, we're not so blessed as to spend most of our time in retreat. And really our daily practice is kind of the foundation of our, identity as Buddhist practitioners and our aspirations as Buddhist practitioners. It's our daily practice that keeps us connected to the blessings that we get through our lineages, through our spiritual teachers, and through the blessings of the holy beings as well. It's our daily practice that provides us the foundation and the sort of steadiness to be able to develop the mental qualities that we need to develop to see the improvement in our human relationships and in the state of our mind as we go forward. And most of us as committed Buddhist practitioners, that's really what we're seeking. Shirtang video di liu sumpare yine yabo samlutan na liu nipa yagare dua karinsa na mi mang chewa di tsam tutsirimpo de tugyo marerwa kashi matok. ane nganso di nyamlen chege mang chewa di nima rere gi kandun nima rere gi nyamlen di nganso di ji re dua dela tene nganso di lagyu dang lama dang sangye dang kebu dang pa cha tsanga gi jina shutu gires ane shi dela tene nganso sem gi yunten yaru tang tu gires ane nima rere gi kandun dang semgi yunten yarudrona danso tene nganso di semshen dang mi dang jawa chatsama yarudro gi rewa chenpo chikres nganso mangchewa deba rewa di redwa. So I would say that in terms of developing a daily practice, especially for people with ADD or different types of neurodiversity, the first thing I would say, and maybe you're hearing this and it's of no benefit to you because you've already done this. But I would say don't be over ambitious in terms of the daily commitments that you accept in the context of, especially different empowerments. Dene neso tambo karila gores na di donang jempe ne thang di dabo mi yana dene kelen mambo shuna chichena yaboyo mares roa kelen nyung drona halam yagadu sangitu. So, I think fortunately, I got involved with Buddhism in the mid-90s. And at that time, lamas still gave pretty heavy practice commitments for different types of initiations, in particular of the Vajrayana, and especially if they were highest yoga tantra initiations. But over the years, attending events and also translating events, I've realized that I think most lamas these days, there are some exceptions, of course, but most lamas these days are not imposing super heavy commitments, right? In many cases, they're very kind and they are imposing a lighter commitment so that people can connect with the practice, but don't have, more than they can manage in terms of daily things that they have to do. Dinsang lama mang chewa kongso kelen jikok sabo chela nangyo mare roa ngalo chungchung kabula pecher di nitong guja guchu ko ngane roa namba chahi ane dene tuse dela dene lama mambuchi konso kelentes jikok sabo roa kele mamu nangi redwa dinsang lama mang chewa konso di tes yangwa nangi re nga chena lama mambuchi konso kengi redwa jikok sabo nangna dene mi yabo nyami tubna dene konso sentes truk drogi dwa dene mutune nyamlen chia kale kabore. So one of the reasons that I especially recommend taking sort of minimal daily commitments is because this is going to give you some flexibility in your practice. And for people with ADD and other types of neurodiversity, flexibility in your practice is very important. You really want to be able to tweak things and do them in a way that works for you. So I can say that as a person with ADD who has really a deep interest in Vajrayana practice in particular, I've been pretty conservative with the events that I've attended in terms of the commitments that are required. So in terms of what I've attended, it's only initiations that require the recitation of the short sadhana. And so I have a couple of short sadhanas along with the Khedrup, the 6-session Guru Yoga that I have to recite every day. And although as a young teenager when I took some of these things, I didn't always maintain them well. I can say that for the last, like 16, 17 years, I've managed to maintain those minimum commitments. And that is a tremendous source of comfort to me. In fact, when I look back, it's one of the things that I kind of feel I did right with my life. Ndela tening also di migewa dabu sagre doa ini lo chuchuk chu dun ne re chuchuk chu dun ring yapu nyar tu so dene kelen de so nyar tu ne dene semtes lo debo lo ship dabu chi pento kyore doa karin sana di ngazo mitse nanglo no ju dramandra shogire ro chi yabu so na dene tes gagire doa. So I was kind of thinking, like, how is it that I maintained those? And I thought that if I shared that, that could be a helpful part of this conversation. So how I maintain them is, first of all, I don't hold myself to like an impossibly high standard in terms of being able to maintain them. You know, if I'm having a really terrible day, sometimes a recitation commitment is literally that. It's a recitation commitment. And those of you who, have taken, teachings from Geshe Sonam, especially Vajrayana teachings, you know kind of the beautiful kind of experience of Vajrayana that he conveys when he teaches with these really kind of profoundly detailed and deep visualizations. And all of those visualizations have a really profound meaning behind them. And the way that he teaches, it's very slow. And you can feel like all of these things are unfolding in front of you. So, of course, ideally, this is the way that we practice a daily commitment. And that's the way that's going to make it the most meaningful. So I try to do that. Of course, I try to do that, but sometimes I'm not able to, especially as I was wrapping up my thesis this year and, had other kind of work responsibilities. And these are things that everyone is dealing with in one form or another, especially, if you're a family person who's also a practitioner, all the responsibilities with the family. The quality of our practice is not always going to be top-notch. But what I would argue is this: the fact that you are able to maintain the daily commitment, even if it's just merely reciting the words, is something to rejoice in. Because a promise made and a promise kept in terms of the Dharma is something that is going to really nourish our confidence to go forward. If we do things in a way that lets us think, hey, I'm not great at this, but I am able to maintain something, that's actually a great beginning place to work from. So for myself, on a bad day, it's just going to be that mere recitation. Kandun sam ginyamlen sam sogire duang so sel tabia dang gom jaya dang din so sam yabuchegi tuzumendu so sem kibome pe kabla chasam so kibomendua in a kandun chikbola tening di pentok yores roa kelen nyarne di pentok yores roa tsam kyorna di jinlap yores. So just merely reciting the words carries a blessing. It carries the blessing of the practices that you're doing, And it carries the blessing of reminding you of many, many important things in Buddhist practice. Even if we're not able to meditate on refuge and bodhicitta, just reciting the refuge and bodhicitta prayer, it reminds us of our aspiration. It reminds us of our source of hope and protection. And that's a tremendous thing. Even if you're not meditating on it, that's a really tremendous thing. Reciting the names of the various holy beings and reciting the mantras. Even if we're not able to do it with attention, these holy beings, a lot of them, they made specific vows in relation to their names and to their mantras. So for example, if we think of the medicine Buddha practice, they said merely through hearing their name, these various medicine Buddhas made vows merely through hearing their name to bestow various types of benefit upon us. And that doesn't mean merely through hearing their name with perfect attention or in the best possible way. It really means, sentient beings are suffering. We have limited faculties. So they prayed to be able to help us in the easiest way. And we can make a connection with their blessings. We can make a connection with the benefit of their practice merely through reciting. So in terms of the nuts and bolts of being a practitioner with ADD or different types of neurodiversity, I mentioned about, attending initiation ceremonies and commentaries cautiously, making sure that you don't take commitments that are going to overburden you. And honestly, even if you don't have ADD or a different type of neurodiversity, many people find commitments very difficult or burn out over the years because life changes, work situations change, family situations change, sometimes even spouses change, the subsequent spouse may not be as supportive of one's Dharma practice as the previous one. There's all kinds of reasons that it can become more difficult. But if you're very, very careful about what you take on, it becomes easier to maintain it. So that's really, one thing that I would emphasize a lot. The next thing that I would say is that, of course, be kind to yourself. There's some situations where, physical and mental health for people, they deteriorate sometimes. I can tell you I've translated many interviews for lamas where people were in difficult situations and they weren't able to maintain commitments. So be kind to yourself, but never give up on trying to start the practice again. That's the most important thing. Because otherwise you're like in a permanently stuck situation, and that's not good for cultivation. Kelen mutune nyar mitu gendin solaya denedi sozo ningje gogire sorwa sozo halebe sa chambo samlo tango maresine yangar go tsugores ki sorwa da buchi gogire duas karinsa nangaso yangar go mitsugna denenganso kadine yunten rubiagi jidi tang kandeslagore ta ringru da budrogire do di aboyo marerwa nazo notru shona ine notru shone di pet chego emendu samotanyo marerwa nazo younger go to taje chegores. So also for that, that's what I would advise people. And I know I've met many Dharma people over the years who I've had connections with who, they maybe even for 6 months or a year weren't able to do their commitments, but they started again. And of course, in the context of Tantra, we can take initiations again. We can do self-initiation practices. There are many ways to heal those commitments. We have confession ceremonies, Vajrasattva. So all of those things are there. So never feel like you're stuck and there's no way for you to improve. So the next thing I wanted to talk about in terms of this is variety. Variety in terms of our practice. And with ADD in particular, building some variety in your practice is something that's going to help a lot with your continuity. Donang jempe natsa yina dene nima reregi kadun yina roa nima rere chipa chikyang yina nganso semla tes kangi redua roa tes nyodo chagires roa chida nima rere soya chigyo res yine nganso di drama natso ki sotang chiksona dene nyogyo mare. So if we take our practice and we build some variety into it. For people with ADD, I think that that's going to be something that is really, really helpful for you. So how do we build variety into our practice? Well, the first thing that I would say is that you want to be practicing both sutra and tantra. I think all lineages really emphasize this, and in particular, if you have Gelug teachers, they're always telling you that without the foundational practices of sutra, tantra is really not going to be able to bring measurable benefits. Nansu di todan laki sungjen nyamlen chego giretua. Tene de ngak chikpola tene droid pendok sheda me barwa ngansu nyamdu drogre sorwa dogi nyamlen ji retua. So that already gives you a door into some variety. So what I would say is that you can incorporate aspects of sutra into the sadhana that you're reciting. This is the kind of most effective way that I find personally to develop things, and it's also kind of a time-effective way when you're pressed for time. So for example, when I begin with the refuge and bodhicitta prayer in the context of like the 6-session yoga or the sadhana, I will already be thinking about what are the points about refuge that I'm going to contemplate today. Am I going to think about the qualities of the individual 3 jewels? Am I going to think about the benefits of refuge? Am I going to think about the objects of refuge from a causal point of view or from a resultant point of view? All of these things are, a variety of points that I can choose to focus on in that particular session. So I find that what's really helpful for me is usually, so if I'm doing the practice in the morning, the night before, I'll think, okay, this is what I'm going to emphasize in terms of the practice. So incorporating, which of the sutra aspects that you want to emphasize. And in the context of the sadhana, that could be refuge from any one of those points. Or perhaps we want to focus more on bodhicitta, and we can cultivate bodhicitta according to equalizing and exchanging self and others, or the 7-point cause and effect instruction. Or we may decide to focus on the 4 immeasurables. But we should really pick, one, I would say, sutric aspect of the practice that we really want to emphasize scrutinizingly. And as we develop a little bit of feeling about that, then we can be ready to switch to something else. But I really suggest planning out the next day's practice the night before. And this is not a hugely difficult thing. I just, usually take like a scrap piece of paper, something like this. And then on the back, I'll write key points for tomorrow. And I'll put the sutra points and the tantra points. So then we have that in place. We're focusing on refuge or bodhicitta or the 4 immeasurables. And then we can decide the part of the sadhana that we're working on. And in terms of how to do that, I would say that, first, receiving a commentary is really important. I mentioned this in the retreat video as well. You want to receive a commentary so that you have the confidence a little bit that you know what you're doing. Of course, we sometimes forget what we hear in a commentary. So that's the other benefit of planning out what you're going to be focusing on the next day. So say that you want to focus on the inner offering. So you've written that. And then as you're writing that, you're like, do I actually remember how to do the inner offering really well? If you don't, you can consult, a commentary in the form of a text or your notes, just really briefly, or have them ready. And then when it comes time to do your practice, that's going to be available to you, and you can contemplate and meditate deeply on it. So I would say fleshing out the practice when you have time, this is what is going to make it really nourishing and interesting as somebody with ADD. If you feel like you're just reading the sadhana, you haven't planned out what you're going to do, you're not going to have that same experience. And as people with ADD are like reading the sadhana, and then you're like, okay, what am I emphasizing today? Where should I put my focus? Then you can kind of feel paralyzed, right? You can kind of have that experience of panic. And the session is not going to be very nourishing or helpful for you. So I just advise the night before, jotting down the points that you want to focus on. You're going to find that, I think, in most cases, really, really helpful. The other thing is that it's important also to have days where we're exploring different practices. So I would say that, pick 1 or 2 days a week where you want to do a little something extra. And it can be reciting a sutra. It can be doing prostrations. It can be making mandala offerings. Just, the 1 or 2 days in your week where you have fewer responsibilities. Plan to do something a little bit extra and make it something that you're curious about, something that you don't usually do. Because, of course, beyond the commitments we've taken, the Dharma is immeasurably vast, and there is so much there. So this becomes a way for the mind to engage in something fresh. It also becomes a way to sort of remind ourselves of the vastness of the diversity that the Dharma provides. So, mix it up once in a while. Do something extra once in a while. It doesn't need to be a huge thing, but just, to keep it interesting for yourself. Another thing that I would say in terms of the practice of meditation, if you have a commitment to practice meditation every day, which for people with ADD, I think is very good, but keep it short. Maybe if you're focusing on developing like shamatha, or you're going through, trying to develop shine, I would say, keep that shamatha or shine component of your practice down to 10 or 15 minutes, at least outside of a retreat situation, and if you're not under the direct guidance of a teacher. Because if you're pushing too much in shamatha and you're not getting anywhere, it can be extremely frustrating. So I would say, with shamatha also mix up the type of meditation that you're doing. When I was in Thailand, in a Theravada monastery for a couple of years, I really enjoyed the walking meditation. We had to sit and do the anapanasati, the breathing, the mindfulness of the breath meditation. And I would sometimes find that so frustrating as someone with ADD. As I said in the previous video, I don't regret it. I got a lot out of it, but it was very frustrating. Then when it came time for the walking meditation, just that physicality gave my mind a release. The heaviness kind of melted away. And as I put one foot in front of the other mindfully, there was kind of like an ease of focus and kind of a return of my confidence. I thought, I can really do this. So one of the things that I've done as a Vajrayana practitioner, and I don't know if maybe some lamas would say it's not kosher, is a lot of us have, beyond the sadhanas, many different mantras that we have to recite. Sometimes you go to an initiation and it's a mantra commitment. So I took a page out of my friend who is a Vaishnava practitioner, and she does her mantra recitations on what she calls japa walks. So I do mantra walks. I keep my mala with me, and then when I go for my walk in the morning, I recite a lot of those mantras. And I find that walking and reciting the mantra, sometimes it's easier to get the contemplation, the visualization going than when I'm sitting on the cushion. So I think incorporating some sort of physicality into your practice can be very good. This can also mean prostrations. Maybe you do a few prostrations at the beginning of your session as a way to sort of, connect with the earth and to ground your mind. So that's another really important thing with daily practice. Be flexible in terms of how you do the practices, because the point is, you want to make it possible to maintain the daily practice. And if you're insisting on perfection every single time, the mind is going to get tight and you're going to burn out. I've been working as interpreter for 15, 16 years now, and I can tell you without a doubt that people who kind of hold it so tightly, they do often burn out and get discouraged. And so the last point I would make is that maintaining a daily practice really is very much connected to being authentic, being where you are, coming to the practice as your whole self. If we create some sort of curated image of ourselves as a good practitioner, but that's not who we really are. If we're trying to be something that we aren't in our practice, that veil of the inauthentic, it's going to contaminate everything, because we can never live up to something we're not. We can only be where we are. So what I would say to you is come to the practice with where you are now. That's a really beautiful thing. And so just to sum up, the authenticity, start from there, approach it from there. You only need to do your best. You don't need to be perfect. Second thing, if all you can do is merely recite the sadhana that day, that is still something. And something is always better than nothing. And never forget that the mere words still keep us connected. And just through honoring our promises, there's great merit in that. The third thing, decide what you want to do or emphasize in the session the night before. If you plan out a little bit, you're not going to sit down and suddenly feel lost. The fourth thing, mix it up a little bit. Choose different things to emphasize or extra practices on days when you have a little bit of time. And the fifth thing, incorporate a little bit of physicality into your practice. That can be something as simple as walking. So as I look at the timer, it's already 25 minutes. There's many more things I want to share. So I might make kind of a second video on daily practice. That's assuming people are interested in watching my dorky videos. I'm just kind of putting it out there and seeing what happens at this point. So there may be more that follows. Thank you so much for your patience and bearing with my natterings. I hope that there was maybe at least one or two things in there that are interesting and fruitful for you. So greetings, be well, and see you next time. Tujhe che tashi dele shukriya.